Today's the first day of early voting, at least as this program rolls out to much of the state. That is Thursday, May the 14th, also Friday the 15th, and Saturday the 16th are early voting days as well. And Election Day is May the 19th. Hi, this is Richard Nelson, and you are tuned in to the Commonwealth Matters. So the question is do you know who's on the ballot? And do you know where these candidates stand? Did you even know that there's an election coming up? Because if you're like a lot of Kentuckians, many are not aware that there is actually a midterm election. So on this edition of the Commonwealth Matters, I'm here with former state auditor Mike Harmon. He's the CPC State Outreach Director.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about the primary. We're going to talk about the candidates. We're going to talk about CPC's candidate comparison project, and also do maybe a little projecting as to what we see happening on
Our
election
crystal ball,
day.
as they say, or we don't do crystal balls, right?
No, we don't do, Mike, this is a Christian organization.
That's
so
right. We don't do that.
right?
We don't do that.
Yeah. But hey, Mike, it is good to have you on the program.
Right. Glad to be here. Excited.
I appreciate you joining us and sharing some of your expertise and wisdom as we talk about politics. You know, this is one of those arenas, and this is something you know, and I think many of the listening audience knows that it's an arena that is filled with all kinds of pitfalls, and it's a lot of people can go wrong. I mean, just having an opinion sometimes and sharing it in the wrong way or with the right group, it could get you labeled.
Especially nowadays. I mean, it was bad when I started back in 1998, but nowadays, if you don't get it just right, and so you do have to be a little careful with your words because everything gets videotaped nowadays.
It's videotaped. We have this little thing called Facebook and other social media outlets
Twitter.
where people are constantly chiming in on the issues. And I think one of the dangers is that people can say something wrong, something that they regret, or things can be taken out of context. And it's hard to hit the reset button with that, right? It's an unforgiving medium. So here's some word of advice. If I could start out with this, when you speak to the candidates or to the issues or an election coming up, temper your thoughts with grace, with humility. Be careful. Realize that there are real people on the ballot. They've got families. They are people just like you and me.
And we should do that both in the primary and the general, but it's also so much harder in the primaries because it's like your family is fighting amongst each other. I mean, we talked about it, when I ran for governor back in 2023, there were 12 people on the Republican ballot, and most of them I was friends with, just about most, if not all of them.
Yeah. And that does make it difficult. And I'm going to pick your brain
Sure.
a little bit as far as what is it like to be on a statewide ballot? What is it like when you have this intra-party discussion, if you will? Because you were at the debates. You were campaigning on the same platforms as these other candidates when you go to the Lincoln dinners and other Republican events. And it's very different than having an opponent who you meet in the general and it's more of a head-to-head. You've got, the Republican camp, you got the Democratic camp, and maybe it's easier in some ways in the general. But I want to pick your brain in just a minute. But before we go into that, Mike, you as the state outreach director headed up what we called our candidate comparison project.
Yes.
And this is where you and the CPC team came up with questions that we put together for a questionnaire. We sent this out to State House, Senate, Congressional. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, like I said, we compiled it and created several questions. We also have our agreement in principle that talks about our foundations of our belief and our faith that we send out to. And we asked them to do two things. We asked them to mark yes or no to the questions that we ask. And also we asked them if they agreed with those foundational principles that they would sign our agreement in principle. So then we took that and we rolled that up. We looked, if they have a voting record, we looked how they voted in other places and we came up with an assessment. Now, we did have to distill the questions down from what we sent out to, a 2 or 3 or 4 word item so that we could get it all on one page to either post it online or send it. And then if there was some discrepancy with how they, answer their question with how they had actually carried themselves in the vote, then we would make notation of that and footnote it to the best of our ability.
That's right. So this went out to Republicans who have a primary, Democrats had also received it as well. Not as many primaries on the Democratic side like it was 20 years ago, 25 years
Right.
ago. Most of the primary activity was with the Democratic Party, and that switched when Kentucky became a majority Republican state. This is where the power base is. This is where I would say the affinity of most Kentuckians line up with Republicans at the national
Yeah,
level.
well, the joke, I always tell is, I ran for like 25 years straight, served for 21 years straight, and never won a Republican primary. Because usually when I was running, it was races that nobody thought a Republican could win. So I was kind of the Don Quixote candidate when I went out and did it.
Are you saying that you were tilting at windmills?
Pretty much. When I ran for auditor,
Hmm.
especially, even my mom didn't think I was going to win.
About that. Well, and that's just testament too, as to God is the one who raises up candidates. We have the conviction that human beings are made in the image of God. We have the conviction that our rights come from God, but also we'll go further with that we believe that God raises up leaders.
Exactly.
And he brings down leaders in his time. And I know that not everybody who's listening and tuned in agrees with that, but that is one of our faith convictions. So, Mike, you had mentioned CPC's agreement in principle document.
Yes.
And this is something that we send out to candidates in both political parties. And essentially, that document says that we believe, as I just said, that human beings are made in the image of God, that our rights come from God, not government, that God defines male and female at conception, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that family is the most foundational unit of society.
Very much so.
And that government should protect that institution where that next generation comes into being so that families can thrive. What was the response when you sent this out to candidates across the state? Did they receive it? Did they respond, or did they ignore it?
I think most of the Republican candidates for the agreement in principle, they did fill it out. There was a handful that did not, and certainly we note that on the candidate comparison. Now, I will say that it took a little bit of effort, not just the agreement in principle, but also the questionnaires sometime to get people to send it in. So there was a lot of emailing and texting and things like that. And so we were very thankful that we had there were some that didn't, but we had a very good turnout of those that we had sent it to.
My thinking, and of course I was involved with this project as well.
Yes.
You spearheaded it, but my thinking is that more than 90% of Republican candidates did respond and filled out the agreement in principle. And that's the ballpark and I didn't do an analysis, but does that sound about right?
I think that's fairly right. I only remember if they filled out the questionnaire, I only remember just 2 or 3 who didn't also fill out and sign the agreement in principle. Because if the Republican, that's a very Republican philosophy, but it was also a very country philosophy when we first formed the country.
The founding fathers and the Declaration of Independence acknowledge that there's a creator who endows us with inalienable rights, right? Among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the sanctity of life is a core issue to us here at CPC, just as it was to our founding fathers.
And our founding fathers probably could define what a man or a woman was too, would be my guess.
I wasn't going to put you on the spot and say, define a woman.
There you go.
But we do believe that God is the one who is in charge of defining those things and defining marriage. And he's the one who gives us our rights. By the way, the reason why that's so important, and I think this is a conservative principle, is that because if there's no creator who gives us our rights and endows us with rights, then where do our rights come from? They would come from government, right?
And if the government gives them, they can also take them away.
100%. That's right. And that's why in the Declaration of Independence, they're called inalienable rights. It means you cannot separate them from you as a human.
Say that 3 times fast.
I will not do that because I will probably say something bad on the radio.
Yeah, we don't want that.
We don't want that.
No,
we don't want that. All right. So you headed up the candidate comparison project, and this went out again to the candidates running for state house, state senate, congressional, and the U.S. Senate races.
Yes.
We ended up at CPC making these available online.
Yes.
So if you go to our website, commonwealthpolicycenter.org, you can find the candidate comparisons for every race that's on the ballot from state house on up.
Every primary. Every primary.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a good point because we do have a general coming up.
Yes.
Those are not going to be posted until...
And we will have to do those all over again.
We will, and I'm
Yes.
glad that you're doing that.
There's a lot of grunt work
There's
in
a
that,
lot-
and
there's
that's
a
all
lot.
right. Somebody's got to do it. It might as well be me.
That's another way of saying thank you. I appreciate that. But there is a lot of work,
I am
right?
supposed to outreach. That is in my title, so we have
That's
to
right.
outreach. So
You're reaching out.
I'm reaching out.
So, Mike, tell us this. What kind of response are you getting to the candidate comparison project?
I think it's really good. From the candidates themselves, I was very tickled that, the majority of we had some that didn't, and, I kind of understand, but a large majority of them did.
Did respond.
Did respond,
Yeah.
as well as once we posted them, we've had a lot of responses from people that have had an opportunity to go on and check it out, and there was a few surprises as well. But
Yeah.
overall, I think most people were very appreciative.
Thank you. Just before we got into the studio here, I talked with a pastor friend of mine in Lexington, and he was asking about the election coming up and about one race in particular, and actually a couple races. And I had shared with him what my thoughts were. And as we were talking, he got on to our website
Yes.
to check it. He said, "Oh, this is interesting." And of course, on the candidate comparison,
Right.
there's photos of the candidates, and then there's a series of statements in the middle or topics in the middle,
Yeah.
and then you can see if the candidate agreed or disagreed, is
Right.
yes or no.
Right.
But it's a very simple way to, first of all, see who's on the ballot for that race, and then to see where they stand on important issues. And anyways, this pastor friend of mine who I was talking to was very grateful for
Yeah.
us doing that. He said he was a fan of ours and appreciated the work that we are. One of the things that I want to talk about, one of the areas that we cover in the candidate comparison are social issues.
Very important to us. As a matter of fact, it was the reason I first started running, especially the pro-life issues. Yeah.
So, and I appreciate you not just then when you first started, but all the way through when you ran for auditor,
Yeah.
when you ran for governor, you made social issues important. And there really isn't a big lobby, so to speak. Not like the Chamber of Commerce has a lobby for the business community.
Right.
You have the Kentucky Hospital Association. They're a lobby for the medical community, hospitals in particular. And that's all well and good. Both those areas are important. You have other lobby interest groups, but there really aren't many voices when it comes to
Right.
the family and social issues. You don't have funders that are, have great big associations and they're writing PAC checks because you're going to defend the family or,
It's
defend.
because people truly care about that issue.
And I think maybe the biggest lobby, and this might sound negative or pejorative, but it's the church. And I don't mean it to be a negative, but the
Oh, yeah.
church, God's people do care about human flourishing. They care about God-given rights. They care about the sanctity of life. It's probably the most important and most violated of our God-given rights. But it's God's people engaging these issues, and they do make a difference, don't they?
They do.
So, Mike, I'm going to ask you, how do you determine the best candidate, even apart from CPC's candidate comparison
Well,
project? How do you?
even before I, came to CPC, and even really before I ran, obviously the pro-life issue was very important to me. It was interesting. We lived in Lexington, I don't know, for about a year and a half, 2 years, and I was working down at a bank, and a pastor came by our house, talked to my wife, said he was running. I don't even remember what office he was running for, but he said, "I would like to put a sign in your all's yard." And my wife said, "Well, my husband's not here. He's kind of particular, and I am kind of particular." He said, "But if you'll leave your sign and you'll leave a number that I can call, I'll have him call you." And then she said he was a pastor and everything. And I thought, well, that's great. He's probably them, but I want to talk to him anyway. So I called this pastor and I asked the pro-life issue. And he's like, "Well, I think that's up to the woman and her doctor." And I was thinking, well, thank you for your time. You can come get your sign. So, we had to be careful. Just because someone has the label of pastor doesn't mean they cherish the same things that we do that the Bible does. So when I was in the house, we get these mailers from groups that are professing that they're religious affiliation, but they were very much in favor of abortion. And to me, that's very contradictory to what God's word says.
Mike, some people say and have said that after the Dobbs decision in 2022, it struck down Roe v. Wade, handed it back to the states. Well, Kentucky has a trigger law that banned abortion. It was dependent on Roe v. Wade being overturned. Lo and behold, it happened. And Kentucky became one of about a dozen pro-life states. And some people say, well, the right to life isn't really a big issue anymore. What would you say to that?
I would say it still is. And, sadly, it's probably not as a big issue as it used to be. And I know even some of my friends, when the overturning of Roe v. Wade came out, they were upset with the timing of it
Mm,
because they felt like it might impact the elections.
yeah,
And I was like, I've been waiting for this for
I
whatever it
know.
was, 20, 25, 30
Yeah,
years. And so when it comes, it comes, and I'm
mm,
excited about it, and we can work through anything else along that lines. But I think it still holds with a lot of people. Sadly, like I said, it's probably not as much as it used to be.
yeah. It's a different issue now than it was even 3 or 4 years ago because most of the abortions are chemical
Right,
abortions.
right,
It's with the drug mifepristone, and it can be prescribed by somebody who's not even a doctor. It's easy to access.
right,
It's about 60 to 70% of all abortions in the country are done through this pill, mifepristone. And there is an issue right now of whether or not states can actually ban this. There was a case that came before the U.S. Supreme Court, and the court put a stay on a lower court ruling that impacted Louisiana's law that banned those drugs from coming across state lines. Now, I realize this is getting into the weeds a bit, but this affects states like Kentucky
oh, it does.
because we have a law as well that says you can't send this drug into Kentucky. You can't have it cross state lines. Our Attorney General Russell Coleman actually is fighting to keep these drugs out. So that's a long way of saying it still is an issue.
Right,
And there's another ruling, one other point on this. Jefferson Circuit Court judge, so this is Louisville, Circuit Court lower level judge struck down or voided part of Kentucky's trigger law, which defined personhood. It
right.
said beginning at conception.
Inception.
And that means that this is a live issue. This
Right,
judge, Jeff Edwards was his name, Judge Edwards, said that the state legislature needs to clarify that. Now, in my opinion, and I'm not in the legislature, but the law was pretty clear that life
right,
begins at
right.
conception. But the legislature will likely come back and do something
Right, and I
to
think
tweak that.
was that in direct reference to the IVF and
It
yeah,
was.
yeah,
It was. There's a woman, a Jewish woman, who said
yeah,
that she's afraid to proceed with fertility treatments, IVF, in vitro fertilization. And she said that the state law is unclear and she didn't want to be prosecuted.
right,
Russell Coleman in his office said, hey, the law is clear. This does
right,
not impact IVF
right,
treatments.
right,
But nonetheless, there's a lawsuit and it's moving ahead, and we will see. So, and I'm in agreement with you that the right to life is an important issue. It's a live issue, and that's one reason why we ask questions like this on our candidate questionnaire. So, Mike, when you're going to the ballot box, what kind of issues? What kind of issues do you look for as far as where the
well,
candidates stand, and then what other character qualities
yeah,
besides the right to life?
like I said, the right to life is like the number one thing. If someone is what they call pro-choice, what I call pro-abortion, then very unlikely unless you've got two candidates that share that, and there are only two that you can vote for. But it was very be difficult. But then you also look about fiscal conservatives. You look about protecting our rights. Our First Amendment, our Second Amendment rights, and all of them for that matter. And so it's important to look and see how they've carried themselves, see how their morals have been when you look at the candidates, and it's difficult. So that's why I'm so pleased, that we have these candidate comparison guides because most people don't pay attention till a
Right.
couple of weeks before the election, if they pay attention at all, because they're too busy trying to work and feed their families
Yeah,
and
that's
move
right.
things along. So it's good for us to be there. Sadly, especially primaries. I mean, it's bad enough in the general, but for primaries, the turnout has just been so weak. When I ran for governor, only got 3% of the vote, but there was only 13% of the registered Republicans that even voted in that primary. I would have much rather we had 50% plus, even if it diluted me down to one where people are going, did you run for governor?
Yeah.
I would rather have that having people vote.
Yeah. So what you're referring to, that was in 2023.
2023.
You were term limited as state auditor,
Correct.
and you threw your hat in the ring early on, as I recall,
Well, the
for
very
auditor.
first one, any of them on 2027. I mean,
You
2023. Yeah.
23, and the turnout, did I hear you correctly? 13%?
13% in the Republican primary. I think the
Wow.
Democrat side was just slightly higher, but not
Mhm.
by much.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was only 3 years ago. And if you think about it, it was 13% of registered Republicans that made a decision for the other, if my math is correct, 87%
Yeah.
that didn't turn out to vote. So a very small
Very
percentage
much
that
so.
actually bothered to vote.
Well, and you consider the fact that I think Daniel Cameron did get a little over 50%. So really only about, 6.5% of the registered voters made that decision.
So the projected turnout for the midterms, I don't think is a lot higher. I've not seen an official
Not
number,
much. I think they're predicting somewhere around 15 or 16.
which is low. Now, another way to look at this is that if you do take the time to go out to vote, let's say it's 10%, just for the sake of having a nice round number. If it's a 10% voter turnout and you show up, your vote represents at least 9 other votes.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Very much so.
So it's weightier, it has more impact, and maybe that's an impetus, and maybe that'll prompt you to get out and vote, those who
Yeah.
are tuned into this program.
It's very important. I mean, I always say, please, please, please go vote because people fought, people died. That's a very important right that we have in this country. We can't abuse it
I
or we'll
agree.
lose it.
I agree. Mike, you mentioned being on the ballot in 2023 for governor. Tell us what it's like being in the fray, having your name on the ballot for a statewide position. What's it like? How did it feel? What were the pressures? What were the things you enjoyed? Tell us, just give
Yeah,
us
well,
a snapshot.
as you know, I've actually been on a statewide ballot 4 times. Once as a lieutenant governor, running when they still ran as a slate with Phil Moffitt. We lost that one, came back and won auditor twice, but those were just general elections, didn't have a primary during that. And then obviously ran for governor and lost that. And a primary and a general are completely different because a primary, you've really got to get your message out because you're not going to get a straight ticket voter because there's not a straight ticket, because you're going and voting for who your nominee is going to be. When you're running in just the general, then people are going to vote for it because there were people that, voted for me that didn't vote for someone else. Like in the 2015 primary, I won. I was always down the polls, but I ended up winning by about 4% because God just blessed us.
Yeah.
But someone like Whitney Westerfield, who worked his butt off, but he had a primary, and then he ended up not winning in the fall for multiple reasons, but he fell short just like 2,000 votes. So it's just one of those things that's just important for people. It's just different between primary and general, but it's wonderful. You get a chance to travel the state. You get a chance to talk to so many people. If you do it right, it would probably be even better if it had a little bit more money. But if I had a little bit more money, then I might have been tempted not to give full credit to God. But there's no way you can't give credit to God when you only had 45,000 going up against somebody that had 800,000.
Right.
So.
And you're referring to the auditor's race.
Yeah, the
there.
auditor's race. Yeah.
So
not the
that's
governor's.
a good point. That's truly a David and Goliath story,
Yes.
which I think we've talked about on this program
Yes.
before. Being on the ballot has to be a different feeling. Have you become more empathetic, if you will? I know that's a dirty word in some circles, but I'm going to use it towards candidates who are on the ballot and towards elected officials because you've served in office and you've had your name on the ballot, but it seems like we're in such an angry time, Mike. There's a no holds bar. It's quite ugly. Just if you don't believe me, go to any of the social media sites.
Please don't. No, just kidding. Except ours.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, don't take our word for it.
Take our word for it. No.
But have you grown more compassionate towards those who are serving in public office?
I guess to a certain degree, I've been involved with it so long, it's hard to remember what I thought beforehand. But yeah, I think so. We talked about it off air that when I was in the House, I had as many Democrat friends as I did Republicans because when I first started, there wasn't hardly any Republicans around. But you just got to be compassionate, and a lot of things that happened, even just on the floor of the House and everything, or in general. Here's what I always tell them when I go in and I talk to kids, or when I used to go in and talk to kids in high school, I would say, know what you're willing to compromise on. Because there probably should be some things you got a little give, but also know what you're not willing to compromise on. And if you know both those things, then you can always negotiate from a position of strength.
Yeah. I heard a wise person once say never compromise your principles, but be willing to make principled compromises.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
that's what it is. The political arena is you have to meet your opponent or meet those on the other side in the middle oftentimes. And hopefully you're moving the needle in the right direction, a direction that leads to a healthier Kentucky that preserves rights and freedoms and promotes opportunities and that kind of thing. So Mike, we've got just a few minutes. We've got elections coming up. Again, just about a week from today, early voting will start. And what are your thoughts on, let's look at the U.S. Senate race. Talk about the news.
Well, the news, obviously, at this point, it'll probably be a couple of weeks out, but, obviously President Donald Trump endorsed Andy Barr. And as I said, I've known several of those in that race, and now it's down to 2. And good friends with both Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron, so that's another one that makes it very difficult. Some people think that, the endorsement of the president just, completely seals it, and it may very well have. But I also know that it was a little late in the game, but I noticed that they've started to do, even before Donald Trump's endorsement, they started doing attack ads on Daniel Cameron, which they had never done before. So what that tells me is somebody's got internal polling that Daniel is either ahead or very close, and they want to get that gap. So I will be personally happy with either one of those. And of course, Nate Morris got an option on an ambassador appointment somewhere in the future.
So Nate Morris was the third leading candidate running for U.S. Senate. It was Andy Barr, Daniel Cameron, and Nate Morris.
Yes.
And he was offered an ambassadorship by Donald Trump
or as I say,
pull out.
Or as I say, an option on an ambassador at a later point.
So. Well, that's what the news was reported. But then he turned around and endorsed Andy Barr, which the irony in this is that he had some scathing attack ads, either from his campaign or from the PAC supporting Morris, were scathing attacks. Andy Barr.
Amazing how quickly things change. So.
Quickly things change. And I don't want to be cynical, but that is the political world where there are deals that are made.
But like I said, it's so hard for somebody like myself because I know, those top two people and care, about those top two people. And I'm going to be happy whoever wins, but I'm also going to be sad for whoever loses.
So one note with that, whoever loses may end up running for governor next year.
Could very well be.
Or another constitutional office.
Yeah.
Because there are some other constitutional office seats that are going to be open, we believe. So, we'll see. So Trump not only endorsed Andy Barr, but he endorsed the opponent to sitting Congressman Thomas Massey of the 4th District. That's the northern Kentucky area. He endorsed Ed Galrein. What's your take on that endorsement? Is that enough to move the needle to unseat Thomas Massey?
If you look at the polling, it doesn't appear like it is. I mean, definitely Ed Galrein has closed the gap, but there's still, if you look at the most latest polls, 8 to 10 points, it could close it, but it's one of those things, especially the Liberty wing up in northern Kentucky is very much in favor of Massey. If it was a statewide election, maybe we would have a little difference in that area in the 4th congressional district. I think you're going to see. Now, I will have to say, in full transparency, when I ran for auditor and only raised $45,000, Thomas Massey actually was $1,000 of that $45,000. So he donated to me.
So that doesn't skew your analysis.
It doesn't skew my analysis. I've looked at the polling and I didn't do the polling. I just, looked at the other polling. And when I've gone, I've traveled the state and got a lot of these Lincoln Day dinners and Reagan dinners. And from what I could tell, in some parts of the 4th, you could tell that people were split, that they were upset with Massey. You go to other parts of the 4th and they're all in on Massey. So who knows? It'll be close, but if you just look at the latest polls, it's probably 8 to 10. My guess is that'll close and it'll probably be somewhere between 4 to 5.
So, Mike, does the endorsement against Thomas Massey by Donald Trump, does that hurt those voters in the 4th District who were Trump endorsed in the Senate race? Could it prejudice those voters to say, well, Trump endorsed against my guy, Thomas Massey, and he's endorsing Barr, therefore I'm going to vote for somebody else? Does it move the needle in the 4th District in Daniel Cameron's direction?
It may a little because, Andy Barr endorsed long before Trump. Well, Trump had already endorsed Ed Galrein, but, Andy Barr endorsed Ed Galrein. Nate Morris, before he pulled out, had endorsed Ed Galrein. And that's probably going to hurt him a little bit, but I'm sure Andy Barr's campaign, weighed the pros and cons of that to try to get the endorsement. So they've probably already looked at those numbers.
One more endorsement was the 6th congressional race. Donald Trump endorsed Dr. Ralph Alvarado over Ryan Dotson. Do you think it moves the needle there?
Well, once again, friends with both of those individuals. It definitely helps. But, when, of course, Ryan Dotson, one of the candidates, State Representative Ryan Dotson, he released some internal pollings that was very favorable to himself. He also released some polling that Jessamine County, Republican Party, done just for their county, and it was very favorable to Ryan. Of course, I have heard Ralph Alvarado speak that he had pollings that he was up, so I'm not sure whose pollings is best. Ralph hasn't actually released his polling to the public. I'd say it probably falls somewhere in the middle. It'll probably be, once again, a lot closer than either of those polls.
So the polling by the Dotson campaign showed that he was up by a 2-to-1 margin. I want to say it was 41% to
41,
20%.
42, but there was
Before-
also like 38% undecided, a huge
correct.
undecided.
So, and I think that might have been not just internal, but I think they've made that public, and it was polling likely voters in the 6 congressional districts. So we will see. I think one of the takeaways from this is we will find out how effective or how impactful Trump's endorsements will be.
But I was over in Owen County, and I got asked by a reporter who's actually an out of state and maybe even out of country reporter, how can people like Massey, in case of that case, how can they like Massey and like Trump? I said, it's very easy. You voted for Trump because you like Trump, and we did, and you vote for Massey because you like Massey. So it's not unheard of.
Very good. All right. Mike Harmon, Kentucky's State Outreach Director for CPC. We appreciate you joining the program. Thank you all for tuning in. And if you haven't checked out our candidate comparisons, go to CommonwealthPolicyCenter.org. It's just the name of our group with a .org at the end, and find all of the resources there. And then don't forget to vote. The polls should be open today as you're watching this program. And then Election Day is May the 19th. Thank you all again for tuning in, and may God bless you.
God bless you.